I still remember the night the desert sky broke its silence. It was August 2006, around 2 a.m., when the call came through the radio at Creech Air Force Base. I'd been stationed there for nearly 5 years, maintaining surveillance drones and radar systems. Nothing ever surprised me anymore, until that night. The officer on duty said only this: "Unidentified craft down, coordinates inbound, move fast." No code name, no details, just urgency. Within 30 minutes, I was in a Humvee cutting across the black emptiness of the Nevada desert. The headlights carved 2 weak tunnels of light through the dust. The moon was low, huge, almost watching. When we arrived, the first thing I noticed was the smell. Not smoke or fuel, but something metallic like ozone after lightning. Then I saw it. Half buried in the sand was a shape that defied logic. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small jet, but it shimmered like liquid glass, its surface rippling faintly even when I stood still. I walked closer, and my Geiger counter went insane for 2 seconds before dying completely. "What the hell is that?" Someone whispered behind me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was pounding in my throat. The craft had no seams, no rivets, no visible engines, just a smooth silver curve reflecting the stars in ways that made them look alive. I reached out, half expecting it to be hot, but it was cold, colder than anything in that desert night. And when my fingers brushed the hull, I heard something, not with my ears, with my mind. It was like a whisper, soft and fractured. "Help me." I froze, pulled my hand back. The others were busy setting up perimeter lights, completely unaware. I glanced around, but no one seemed to have heard it. Maybe it was my imagination, maybe not. Inside the craft, through a small opening that looked melted rather than broken, a faint blue glow pulsed like a heartbeat. The air was thicker there, humming, as if electricity itself filled the space. I crouched, shining my flashlight, and saw movement. At first I thought it was smoke, then it shifted. A form, humanoid but fragile, almost translucent, was lying near what looked like a control panel. Its body gave off faint light, not white, but soft blue, like moonlight underwater. It was breathing, or something close to it. I should have called it in. I should have waited for orders. But something inside me, curiosity, compassion, maybe madness, made me move closer. The being turned its head slightly, and for a brief second, I met its eyes. They weren't alien in the way movies imagine. They were human, ancient, intelligent, and filled with pain. It reached out a trembling hand toward the ship's controls. Sparks flared weakly and died. I could feel its desperation. Somehow, without words, I knew what it wanted. The ship was dying, and it needed help. I was a technician, not a hero, but the machine before me, whatever it was, had systems that strangely resembled our own electrical circuits, though arranged with impossible precision. I opened my toolkit and began working. My hands shook, but once I started, instinct took over. It was like fixing a wounded bird, fragile and alive. Every time I connected a wire, the glow inside the ship brightened. The being's breathing grew steadier. Then, suddenly, the craft itself responded, humming like a living organism waking from sleep. When the final panel sealed itself shut, the being slowly rose. It was weak, but standing. It came close, just inches from me, and placed a luminous hand on my chest. I felt warmth spread through my body, a deep, radiating heat that wasn't painful but cleansing. Then, without moving its mouth, it spoke inside my head. "You have mended what was broken. I will give you what you seek." Before I could ask what that meant, the ship began to rise silently, sand spiraling beneath it. The light grew so bright that I had to shield my eyes, and then, gone. No sound, no explosion, just an empty sky full of trembling stars. I stood there for a long time, my knees weak, the desert wind cold against my face. My radio crackled. "Unit 4, Report status. But I couldn't speak. Because the last thing that echoed in my mind wasn't human, and it wasn't mechanical. It was a promise, a truth that would one day shatter everything I believed in. They debriefed me before sunrise, a windowless room, 2 metal chairs, 1 recorder that wasn't recording. The Major asked the same questions in circles: time, position, who else made contact, whether I'd observed biological presence. I kept my answers clipped: anomalous craft, possible autonomous system, no crew observed. He watched my face for cracks. I watched the door. When they finally released me, the desert had turned gold. I walked alone to the barracks, feeling like I'd stepped out of a dream and into a photograph of my own life. My hands were still warm from where the being had touched me. The warmth didn't fade. It settled deep in my chest, a quiet ember. I showered, lay down, and closed my eyes for what I thought would be 10 minutes. The darkness that found me was not sleep. It was a corridor, long, curved, lit by pulses of blue like breathing. Symbols flowed along the walls, impossible and beautiful, like calligraphy written by water. I understood none of it, and yet something inside me leaned forward like a plant toward light. Then the voice came. Not sound, not thought, but a calm pressure that arranged my mind into a listening shape. You mended what was broken. The words felt like they were being remembered rather than heard. Now we will mend what you cannot name. I woke with a start. My room was quiet except for the thin hum of the air conditioner. The clock said I'd slept 23 minutes. I stood, and the world sharpened, too sharp. The dust motes were individual universes. The distant thud of a hangar door sounded as intimate as a heartbeat next to my ear. I blinked hard until everything softened enough to be bearable. At mess, Jenkins slapped my shoulder. "You look like you saw a ghost." I made a joke about Chow Hall eggs. He laughed and moved on. The lie felt heavy, as if a new gravity had settled into my bones. That night, the voice returned. It didn't interrogate, it invited. Images opened like pages, an ocean beneath 2 moons, hands of different shapes raised in the same gesture of hope, a child drawing a circle around a star and whispering a word I didn't know. I felt a question forming in me, as natural as breathing. What are you? The answer was not a definition, but an orientation, like someone turning your face to look at the horizon. We are travelers. We are witnesses. We are makers of bridges where stone cannot hold. I saw then the craft rising from the sand, not as a machine, but as a kind of promise, an agreement between intention and matter. Days bled into each other. The incident was reclassified, filed beyond my pay grade. The perimeter team rotated out. I signed papers that replaced memory with penalties. But the voice did not sign anything. It stayed. Small things changed. A scar on my forearm, barbed wire back in '03, faded to a thin silver thread. The migraine that used to stalk me after long hours in the control room never came back. More unsettling than the healings were the knowings. I could look at a circuit and feel where the break was, as if my fingers remembered it before my tools did. Once a generator coughed itself toward failure, and I reached out without thinking, palmed the casing, and felt the right sequence of resets bloom in my head like a map of light. I started going to the chapel again, which surprised even me. The late afternoon light through the small, stained glass made the floor look like pieces of a sky that had forgotten how to be whole. I sat in the back, where I'd always sat as a kid, half hiding, half hoping. "If you're there," I whispered, "if you've always been, help me not break what little faith I have by looking too hard at the wrong thing." The voice didn't interrupt. It waited until I stood to go. "Looking is not what breaks," it said gently. "Fear is what snaps the thread. Keep the thread." I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? My father would say to see a doctor or a priest. My buddies would say to see both and then drown them in beer. Instead, I ran. Far into the perimeter roads at night, the cold air scraping my lungs clean, until the base lights were a constellated fence behind me and Nevada was an ocean of dark. There, the voice was clearest. It didn't push, it didn't command. It pointed towards something I had loved and feared in equal measure since childhood, the idea that the universe might be personal. The first real test came a week later. The Major called me back to that same room. No recorder this time, just a folder I wasn't allowed to touch. "We know you accessed the craft interior," he said. "We need your total account." I tasted metal. The ember in my chest flared, not as heat now, but as a steadiness. I told the truth he expected, diagnostics, visual impressions, times, and I kept the truth that was mine, the touch, the voice, the corridor of blue. He stared at me for a long moment and then slid a paper across the table. "You will not discuss this outside authorized channels." His eyes softened half a degree. "Understood?" "Understood." The word felt like a door that locked from both sides. That night, the voice returned once more, closer than breath. "You chose the thread," it said. "Now we begin to pull." I didn't sleep after that. I watched the ceiling fade from black to grey, and I knew with a clarity that tasted like fear and relief that whatever I had repaired in the desert had repaired something in me, and that both mending and breaking would have to live in the same heart for a while, because faith, I was beginning to learn, is not what you hold on to when the world is steady. It's the rope you braid while the wind is rising. The first thing that went wrong was a clock. It hung above the maintenance bay door, a cheap analog face we all ignored, except when we wanted an excuse to leave early. That afternoon it froze at 14:07. Not the second hand, everything. I stared at it for a moment, then checked my wristwatch. 14:09. When I looked back up, the clock juddered forward in a blur, overshot, and landed perfectly on 14:09, as if it had remembered time belatedly and rushed to catch up. "Power hiccup," Ramirez muttered, tapping a fuse box with the reverence of a gambler. But the fuse box was fine. The bay lights dimmed, then brightened past normal, bleaching the world like sun on snow. A hairline crack of unease opened in me. The second thing was the radio. We were running diagnostics when it coughed out a burst of sound, voices not in English, layered like a choir rehearsing different songs in the same room. Somewhere inside that texture, a single tone threaded through, pure and unwavering. The hairs on my arms stood up. I knew the tone. It was the color of the corridor in my dreams. That night, I took a drive past the perimeter road, the sky a wide black bowl pricked with cold stars. I parked where the land folded into a shallow arroyo, killed the engine, and let the quiet envelop me. The voice didn't arrive like before. It waited, and in the waiting, a question sharpened. If this is in my head, why does the world move around it? A coyote barked in the distance, and the sound came to me in layers. Distance, air, the animal's ribs moving, the shape of its lungs. It wasn't hearing, it was knowing. I closed my eyes and pressed my palm to the truck's dashboard. Heat, circuitry, a wire near fatigue. If I were insane, then insanity had an engineer's precision. In the chapel the next afternoon, I lit a candle and sat in the second-to-last pew, close enough to the exit to keep my courage. The stained glass poured fractured color on the floor. I whispered, "If you are the source, then speak. If you are the echo, let me hear the first sound." I didn't know who I was addressing, God, the being, or myself. Maybe all three. When the door creaked open, I thought it was the chaplain. It was Major Hart. He never entered rooms, he occupied them. "Walk with me," he said, not a question. We crossed to a storage corridor that smelled of polish and dust. "Unusual frequencies have been recorded near your duty stations," he said, "coinciding with your shifts." His eyes were all hard glass. "Anything you want to tell me?" "No, sir." A long pause. "You are a good technician, Sergeant." Do not become a problem." He left the last word floating like a trapdoor. After he walked away, my legs trembled. I had an urge to run to the desert and keep running. Instead, I went back to the bay and lost myself in work. That's when the third thing happened. We were testing an aging generator, the kind that complained in a language of rattles and sighs. A red fault light popped, bright as a wound. I leaned in. The smell of hot metal stung my throat. Before I could stop myself, I pressed my palm to the housing. A map formed in my mind, paths of resistance, flows, a single knot of heat pulling the whole machine toward failure. Without thinking, I flicked a sequence of toggles that wasn't in any manual. The generator smoothed. The fault light blinked once, apologized, and went dark. Ramirez squinted. "What did you just do?" "Reset, in stages." It was true, but not the truth. That night, sleep didn't bring the corridor. It brought a field, tall silver grass under two moons, wind moving like breath. The being stood a little distance away, not as a figure now, but as a shape of light, in the shape of a person. Edges soft, presence steady. "You test the weave," the voice said. "It holds." "What are you doing to me?" "Not doing, uncovering. What is wound tight inside you loosens when it is warmed." "Are you God?" It came out harsher than I intended. The answer was only stillness for a long moment, like the pause a musician takes before the note that matters. "Names are bridges the mouth can carry. We are a bridge you cannot pronounce. But if you must choose, call us witnesses." "Witnesses to what?" "The same thing your saints and your telescopes are trying to see." I woke with my throat tight and a taste of salt on my lips. Dawn was a wash of pale fire over the hangars. I sat on the edge of the bed and understood, with an ache as clean as fresh air, that I had reached a line. On one side, the tidy grid of the life I knew, ranks, manuals, measured prayers. On the other, a country with no roads, where clocks stall and radios sing in colors. I drove to the small town outside the base and walked into St. Brigid's, a white wooden church that looked like it had been built from the memory of a larger cathedral. An old priest was sweeping the aisle. He looked up and saw whatever was in my face. He set the broom aside without a word and sat in the front pew. I sat beside him. "Father," I said, voice low, "how do you know the difference between a miracle and a mistake in your mind?" He smiled sadly. "You don't. You learn to live with the question. That's where faith breathes." I laughed, a single broken sound. "What if the thing that breathes is not from here?" He folded his hands. "Then perhaps here is larger than we thought." On the drive back, my radio flickered to life. Not static, a tone, pure, unwavering, threaded through the noon noise and settled in my chest like a plumb line. "Reality is not the test," the voice said gently. "You are." I tightened my hands on the wheel and for the first time didn't argue. The voice didn't tell me where to go. It showed me a feeling, a compass made of warmth that tugged slightly right when I drifted left, steadied when I aligned. I left the base after midnight with a thermos of coffee, a flashlight, and the map I wasn't going to need. The desert night was a vast ear listening to the soles of my boots. I parked where the dirt road dissolved into pale sand and walked. The stars were so sharp they felt like they could cut skin. Every sound was honest. Crickets, the far-off complaint of a truck on Highway 95, my own breath pacing itself. The further I got from the fence line, the more the air took on a thin electricity, like the moment before a summer storm. "Here," the voice said, though no word was spoken. I stopped in a shallow basin ringed with scrub and low rock. Nothing special, the kind of place you could ignore 100 times on your way to somewhere else. The sand held the ghost prints of some small animal. Wind had combed everything smooth. I crouched, pressed my palm to the ground. Warmth met me. Not the surface warmth of the day held over, but a pulse, faint and rhythmic. as if something far below the crust was breathing. "What do you want me to see?" I asked the emptiness. The answer didn't arrive in sentences, it arrived as sight, not hallucination, overlay. The desert stayed itself, but another layer rose, translucent and precise. Lines unfurled across the sand in spirals and lattices, like frost patterns on glass. The geometry was alive, shifting but consistent, a language of curves and ratios. I knew without knowing how I knew. I was looking at a blueprint, not of a machine, but of relation. The way forces spoke to each other. How gravity bent around intention. How light carried information like a hymn. At the center of the basin, a faint column of air shimmered. It was nothing you could have photographed. A camera would have called it distortion. My bones called it presence. I took a step forward, and the patterns brightened. I felt my chest respond, not with fear now, but recognition, the way you sometimes know a song you've never heard. Creation is not a single event, the voice impressed gently. It is a conversation still happening. Between who? Between what is and what is possible. Wind moved through the sage with a sound like paper turning. A thought rose in me, uninvited, old and stubborn. Where does God fit in this? The question floated, then landed like a bird. The word you use is adore, the voice said. You have walked up to it all your life. You think opening the door will erase the house. It will not. It shows the rooms beyond. I laughed once, breath turning white in the cold. You're telling me my faith isn't wrong. It's incomplete. Your faith is a candle you carried in a night you thought was small. The night is larger. Keep the candle. Learn the constellations. The patterns on the ground shifted again, tightening around my feet. For a heartbeat, the basin wasn't a basin, it was a lens. Through it I saw, no, experienced, a chain of moments that wasn't linear. A woman in a small chapel lighting a votive and whispering for her son. A radio telescope catching a whisper that arrived before it was sent. Hands, so many hands, lifting in grief, in praise, in ordinary reaching. Every gesture, every plea, every thank you part of the same lattice, braided into the fabric like bright thread. My knees gave up, and I found myself sitting, palms open to the sand. Why me? The question was a rasp, because you fixed a broken thing without asking who deserved it. A pause, warm as breath, and because you keep the thread. The stillness after that wasn't empty. The geometry dimmed to a memory. Above me, the stars relaxed back into their distances. I felt suddenly sharply human, tired, thirsty, aware of the ache in my shoulders and the stone pressing my ankle. And yet, the ember in my chest glowed steady. The world had not become less. It had become more itself. I poured some coffee from the thermos and drank it like it could anchor me. The horizon was beginning to pale. In that early light, I noticed something simple and undeniable. Where I'd pressed my palms into the sand, two faint impressions glowed with a very soft, very ordinary light, like dust catching dawn. I brushed them, and the glow flickered, then folded into the grains. I stood to leave. A thought surfaced, shy as a child. If this is real, if the universe is a conversation, does it listen back? The answer came so quietly, I might have missed it, if not for the way the air thinned, for the way my heart stepped exactly on the beat. It always has. On the walk back, I didn't try to square anything. I didn't try to make a creed out of a night. The desert lifted me out of the habit of explanation and set me down in attention. When the base fence came into view, the world looked the same. Dull floodlights, tired chain link, the guard's bored yawn. But I was not the same person walking toward it. I was carrying a map I couldn't fold. The sun cracked the ridge and poured gold over the gravel as I reached the truck. My radio clicked alive with morning chatter. Then, under it, the pure tone, thin as a thread, strong as steel, ran through the noise and drew a straight line from the basin to my chest. "Keep the candle," the voice reminded me. "Learn the constellations." I turned the key. The engine caught. For once, I didn't look back. It began with the coffee pot. Morning shift, fluorescent hum, stainless steel glare. I was staring at the glass carafe when a flare from the window slid across its curve and broke into a fine lattice, bright lines crisscrossing like scaffolding in a dream. The pattern held for a breath, then dissolved into ordinary reflection. If it had been random, I'd have let it go, but it wasn't random. It echoed the geometry I'd seen in the desert basin, the living frost script that braided forces together. I set my mug down and moved the carafe slowly. The lattice returned at a different angle, then reassembled into something tighter. Triangles nested inside spirals, ratios whispering to each other like old friends. For a second, the smallest triangle pulsed, and in that pulse I felt a syllable, not heard but registered. A soft, patient yes. After that, light stopped behaving politely around me. The diagnostics monitor flickered at 60 hertz, then, just once, skipped into an odd cadence that traced a prime number rhythm. A puddle in the tarmac held the sky like a bowl and rippled in bands that weren't wind. Even the candle in the chapel breathed in steady beats that wrote themselves against the wall, like faint Morse no human ever agreed upon. I began to carry a small notebook, not because I thought I'd decode the universe on government issue paper, but because writing steadied the vertigo. I drew what I saw: lattices, pulses, spirals. I marked the intervals between the flickers, counted them under my breath, translated them into numbers. When I compared notes across different lights and different days, a pattern emerged, a sequence that repeated, but never lazily. It braided back on itself like a river remembering its source. The first time the sequence completed, I was in the control room alone. A navigation screen to my left went dim for a heartbeat and returned with a faint grid failure that would have sent most techs hunting for a cable. I didn't move. The grid's tiny imperfections blinked through the numbers I'd been tracking, 3, 5, 8, 13, then resolved into a new figure I hadn't seen. A simple circle, quietly inscribed by absence. I touched the bezel. "I'm listening." "You always were," the voice answered, not in words so much as a gathering clarity behind my eyes. "Now you are also watching." "Is this language?" "It is permission." I should have felt triumphant. Instead, an ache opened under my ribs, the kind that arrives when you finally find what you've been chasing and realize it isn't a trophy. It's a door that requires both hands and whatever you were planning to carry. That evening, I lit a candle in the chapel and put my notebook on the pew. The tiny flame threw a halo that wavered with the base's air cycle. Within the halo, 3 bright points settled into a triangle. The triangle breathed wider, and the space inside it swelled like a chest filling. The message came not as doctrine, but as architecture. The holy you named is not a distant throne. It is the coherence that allows anything to be itself. Where you prayed, you practiced alignment. Where you loved, you learned resonance. Where you mended, you joined what yearned to join. I closed my eyes and felt my life flick through me like slides, my mother's hands teaching me to cross myself, the metallic tang of sacramental wine and fear on my confirmation day, the oil on my fingers when I fixed my first radio, the way my wife once looked at me under a porch light before we couldn't hold the same future in our hands anymore. None of it was discarded. All of it was gathered, not invalidated, integrated. "Then why does this feel like losing God?" I whispered. The candle made no noise. The flame's halo narrowed into a line, thin, unwavering, then widened again. "Because your God was a portrait you loved. Now the frame cannot hold the sky." I pressed my palms together, not in defiance of that truth, but in grief for the frame. In that grief, I noticed something quiet. The prayer wasn't breaking, it was changing its address. My words, the ones I'd learned as a boy, still worked. They just landed further, wider, into a listening that outgrew the room. The bass didn't slow down to accommodate my revelations. The major called twice that week. Jenkins wanted help with a failing sensor. Paperwork bred in trays like rabbits. I worked, I ate, I ran. And all the while, the world blinked messages at the edge of ordinary. Reflections, monitor ghosts, the strobe of a security light glancing off a passing bird's wings like a syllable of light. The sequence braided toward something that felt like a threshold. The numbers translated into a circle again, but this time the circle wasn't empty. It held a cross, 2 lines, not Christian in symbol so much as fundamental, intersecting vectors, meeting in a point that trembled with meaning. I felt the old reflex in me rise to name it altar, and another part of me, newly patient, letting it be axis. "Is this the message?" I asked in the quiet of my room, the notebook open to a page of circles and lines. "This is the grammar," the presence said. "The message requires your voice, too. My voice. Faith is not a script you recite, it is a duet you dare. The old belief in me, simple, hard, beloved, buckled, not shattered by argument, but softened by a larger kindness. I didn't stop loving the God I knew. I started loving the one I couldn't contain, and that love asked me to risk the comfort of certainty. That night, before sleep, the room's shadows aligned into a brief, impossible constellation I recognized from a child's painting in my memory. A stick-figure star my sister drew the week our father left for deployment. The lines trembled, brightened, and faded. And in their wake a sentence formed, not carved in stone, but written in breath. You are not being asked to believe less. You are being asked to belong more. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark, hands open, as if the message might fall into them. It did. They grounded me on a Tuesday. No flight line, no bay access without a supervisor, no unsupervised time in control rooms. The memo didn't say why. It didn't need to. I'd watched the quiet triangulation for days, Major Hart's narrowed gaze, 2 techs whispering as I walked in, the chaplain's door staying closed when I passed. Whatever I was becoming didn't fit on their clipboard. The psych eval came wrapped in courtesy. Captain Olson poured me government coffee and asked about sleep, appetite, unusual sensory phenomena. Her pen hovered as if the truth might catch it on fire. I told her I was sleeping enough, eating fine, and that sometimes the fluorescent lights flickered weird. She nodded like a shepherd dog, deciding whether to bark. At the end, she said, "You've served well. Let us serve you now." It sounded kind, but the subtext clicked like a bolt sliding home. Cooperate or be removed. Outside her office, the hallway felt an inch too narrow. The base was the same, clean lines, measured routines, but I'd lost the ability to pretend the lines were the whole map. Certainty had been a room I knew by heart. Now the walls had become windows, and I was dizzy from the view. That night, I drove to the edge of the range where the desert begins to own its silence. I killed the engine and sat with my forehead on the steering wheel. "I can't do this duet," I whispered to the dark. "They will end me, and maybe they should." The answer didn't come as rescue. It came as memory. My father teaching me to tie a bowline. The rabbit comes up the hole, round the tree, back down the hole. His hands over mine, the rope becoming a loop that held under pressure and yet untied clean. "Use the knot that holds the load without breaking the line," he'd said. "A good knot respects both the weight and the rope. Speak what respects both," the presence said. "Closer than breath, gentler than pity. Do not argue, name, do not prove, reveal." When I returned to the barracks, a note waited on my bunk. "Briefing, No 600, room C7, mandatory. Sleep didn't bother to compete. I lay awake and listened to the HVAC chant its indifferent liturgy and rehearsed what not to say. In room C7, the air smelled like dry markers and something faintly metallic. Art was there, and two civilians in suits that fit like decisions already made. A screen glowed behind them with the frozen image of a desert basin. Not the basin, but any basin. Prosaic, deniable. Hart began. "Sergeant, your access restrictions will remain while we review anomalous events coinciding with your duty periods." He let the word anomalous sit between us like bait. "We need clarity." "I'll give you what I have," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. One civilian, grey hair, quiet eyes, tilted his head. "We're listening." I thought of the rope, the load, the line. Name, don't argue. I spoke of patterns in reflections and harmonics in faulty monitors. I said I'd observed repeating sequences that hinted at coherent information transfer. I did not mention the corridor of blue, the touch on my chest, or the candle that wrote geometry on chapel walls. I refused both the trap of reduction and the temptation of spectacle. I described the edges of what I'd seen and let the center remain the size of a sky. The other civilian, a jaw like a locked drawer, leaned forward. "Are you claiming communication with a non-human intelligence?" The room went very quiet. In that quiet, I felt the ember in me widen, not heat now, but space. "I am claiming," I said, "that reality is presenting coherence where we expected noise, and that my proximity to a previous incident may have changed the way I perceive that coherence." "Perceive," Hart repeated, as if tasting a weather report he didn't trust. Grey-hair's eyes didn't leave my face. "And what does it say, this coherence?" I almost said it sings. Instead, it invites alignment, mending. It suggests that what we call holy might be a property of the universe that allows things to become themselves without tearing the fabric that holds them together. Silence. Jaw tightened. Pen paused. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang twice and stopped. Hart inhaled to speak, but the lights overhead pulsed, soft once, not a flicker, a breath. It would have been nothing to anyone else. To me, it was a hand on my shoulder. "Don't push. Name." "I'm not asking you to believe me," I said softly. "I'm telling you what happens when I stop arguing with what I see." Hart exhaled through his nose. Grey hair closed his notebook as if concluding a chapter. "Sergeant," he said, "you will remain restricted, but we will want you present when the analysis team reviews recent spectral anomalies." A demotion that felt like an invitation, or maybe it was mercy disguised as oversight. Either way, the door didn't slam. In the chapel that evening, I sat without lighting a candle. The space held me like a palm. I didn't tell them everything, I confessed. Does that make me a coward? The flame that wasn't a flame, more the idea of one, rose in my mind's corner and steadied. It makes you a steward. The duet begins sotto voce. There will be time for crescendos. "I don't want to be a prophet," I muttered. "Good," the presence said, almost amused. "Prophets want to be right. Witnesses want to be true." Something in me unclenched. The grief for my old certainty was still there, honest, clean, but it no longer felt like a loss I had to defend. It felt like a tide going out to make room for a larger shore. On my way out, I passed Jenkins in the hall. He looked at me, hesitated, and then said, "Hey, my grandma would say, when you don't know what to pray, He shrugged, embarrassed. "Sometimes humming's enough." In my room, I turned off the lamp and let the dark take its shape. Without trying, I hummed, one note, then another, a line that held without breaking. The air gathered around it like a knot that respected both the weight and the rope. The voice listened. I could feel it smile. They called it the hum, officially Spectral Anomaly 77B. Unofficially, it was the sound the machines started to dream in. 3 nights after my briefing, the analysis team logged an unexplained transmission, a steady, low-frequency resonance cutting across all radar bands. It didn't match any aircraft, satellite, or ground interference. It was clean, intentional, rhythmic. They said it came from somewhere north of Groom Lake. The first recording lasted exactly 3 minutes and 13 seconds. When they played it in the briefing room, the air changed. The sound wasn't loud, but it filled the space. A deep, layered vibration, neither mechanical nor organic. My spine recognized it before my mind did. The same tone that had threaded through the radio, the candlelight, the silence between my thoughts. Hart watched me like a hawk. "Anything familiar, Sergeant?" I could have lied, but my pulse was already answering for me. "Yes," I said quietly. "It's harmonic, like an echo of a system tuning itself." Grey hair leaned forward. "Explain." I hesitated. The hum was gentle, like an enormous choir holding one endless note. If you listened long enough, it began to separate into overtones, high, fragile frequencies stacked on each other like glass towers. I closed my eyes and let my breath fall into rhythm with it. "It's not a broadcast," I murmured. "It's a response." Hart's voice cut through. "Response to what?" "To us," I said before I could stop myself. The hum faded from the speakers, but not from the room. It was as if it had imprinted on the air. The scientists exchanged glances, half skepticism, half hunger. Hart cleared his throat. "You'll accompany the next monitoring session. You'll observe, not interpret." "Understood." I nodded, but inside, something ancient and wordless was already answering the hum. The control room was dim, walls lined with screens showing waveforms that moved like slow heartbeats. When the signal came again, I felt it before the instruments registered it. The floor vibrated faintly under my boots, a tremor that wasn't seismic but relational, like the world remembering its tuning fork. The technicians were shouting numbers, calibrations, coordinates. I ignored them. My focus narrowed to the hum. It wasn't just sound, it was structure. Within the pattern, gaps formed, brief silences perfectly measured, repeating like punctuation. I counted them under my breath. 3, 5, 8, 13. Fibonacci again. The universal sequence. A screen flashed an alert. Amplitude spike detected. Unidentified source. And then all the monitors went white. Not failure white, not static. Just pure, radiant light that pulsed once and steadied. The hum grew soft, delicate, almost tender. "Do you see now?" The presence whispered. I whispered back, "You're here." Hart barked, "What did you say?" I turned to him. "It's not a signal from space. It's a mirror. It's showing us ourselves." He slammed his hand on the console. "Sergeant, that's enough." But the room didn't listen to him. The hum filled every wire, every surface. Papers trembled, monitors flickered with patterns of light that arranged themselves into circles, interlocking, breathing, alive. The air shimmered. For a split second I saw faces within the light, not human but familiar. They weren't beings in the way we define them. They were configurations of harmony, witnesses made of resonance. Then, as suddenly as it had come, everything stopped. Silence slammed down, heavy and absolute. The fluorescent bulbs buzzed back to life. Hart's face was pale. "Cut the feed, wipe the logs. Nobody outside this room saw that." But they had. Every instrument had recorded it, and every recording would eventually be copied, shared, dissected. The truth had slipped through the cracks before they could seal them. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum was still inside me, looping softly like a heartbeat. I walked outside, past the fences, until I reached the same ridge where I'd first seen the sky break open. "Why show this now?" I asked the stars. "Why me?" The answer came as a warmth, spreading from my chest outward, because you learned to listen without needing ownership. Faith was never meant to end at belief. It was meant to begin at recognition. I sank to my knees in the sand. The night wind carried fragments of the hum through the rocks. For a moment, the desert and I breathed together, one continuous instrument. I didn't know if I was praying, listening, or both. When I opened my eyes, the horizon shimmered faintly. Lines of light, like the ones from the basin, glowed in the distance, stretching farther than I could see. The world wasn't closed anymore. It was porous, alive, listening back. And in that vast listening, I finally understood. The forbidden frequency wasn't forbidden at all. It was home, patiently waiting for someone to remember its song. 2 days after the hum, the bass turned into a tuning fork. Nobody admitted it, but everyone felt it. The subtle vibration underfoot, the sense that the air itself had a pulse. Instruments still claimed the anomaly was inactive, yet pens rolled off desks and metal doors hummed faintly, as if something buried deep beneath the desert was breathing again. Heart barked at engineers, threatened demerits, demanded isolation protocols. Nothing worked. The frequency was no longer coming from the outside. It was resonating through us. That night I walked the corridors alone. Every fluorescent tube flickered in rhythm. 3 long pulses, 2 short, 1 long. Morse, without a key. I stopped under one of the lights and whispered, "I hear you." The bulb steadied. The hum inside my chest responded, soft and low. "You are not hearing us. You are remembering how to listen." In the mess hall, Jenkins was staring at a metal tray, eyes wide. "Look," he muttered. Across the tray's surface, water from a spilled cup had formed concentric ripples, perfect circles, pulsing outward in time with something we couldn't hear. When I touched the edge, the vibration traveled through my fingers like a heartbeat. Jenkins shivered. "You feel that? Like it's alive?" "It is," I said before I could stop myself. By morning, the bass wasn't the same. The frequency seemed to synchronize with emotion. When a man shouted, his voice carried overtones of the hum. When someone prayed quietly, the vibrations softened. The air had become responsive, intimate. I overheard a young tech near the hangar say, "My wife called last night, said she heard it too, miles away." The forbidden frequency had escaped its confinement. Hart ordered a full lockdown, radios confiscated, external comms cut. He cornered me outside the operations room. "Whatever this is, it started with you, so you're going to help us stop it." I met his gaze and saw fear disguised as duty. "You can't stop resonance," I said quietly. "You can only join or resist it, and resistance breaks." His jaw tightened. "This is an order, Sergeant." I almost saluted. Almost. But then the corridor lights dimmed and bloomed again, bathing the walls in a pulse of warm gold. We both froze. The signal is not invasion. The presence whispered through the hum. It is remembrance, the universe calling itself by name. Hart backed away, muttering something about a generator surge. I just stood there, trembling, not from fear but recognition. That night I drove to the old radar tower outside the perimeter. The desert stretched wide and expectant under the stars. The hum had changed. It was no longer a tone. It was a chorus, layers of sound weaving through each other like threads of silver. I looked toward the horizon and saw them, tiny flares of light rising from the sand. Not craft, not fire, but pillars of luminous air, hundreds of them, shimmering in silence. They rose and fell in rhythm, breathing with the world. I fell to my knees, my pulse matched the cadence. "Is this the end?" I asked. "No," the voice replied. "It is the unbeginning, the point where the finite remembers the infinite inside itself." I didn't understand the words, but I understood the feeling, connection, absolute and unafraid. The light drew closer, not blinding, just steady, like a hand reaching out. Within it, I saw shapes, faces, animals, stars, rivers, every form dissolving into one radiant whole. A single phrase pulsed through the light, neither English nor alien, but somehow both. "We are not visitors. We are the echo of your own becoming." tears came without effort. For years I'd tried to define faith as certainty. Now I saw it for what it was, a frequency we had forgotten how to hold. Behind me, the radio in the truck crackled to life. Hart's voice, strained, urgent. "Return immediately. The base, it's..." Static swallowed the rest. I didn't move. The desert itself was singing now. Every rock, every grain of sand vibrated with quiet joy. "If you go back," the voice said, "you will speak for what cannot speak, not to prove, but to remind." The pillars of light rose higher, joining into one vast column that reached into the clouds. The hum peaked, a single, infinite note that carried the weight of every prayer, every equation, every heartbeat ever uttered into existence. Then, as gently as it began, it faded. The desert returned to silence, but the silence was full, alive, listening. I stood there until dawn painted the sand in gold. I knew I'd go back, not as a soldier, not as a believer, but as a bridge. Between what we worship and what we are. Between matter and meaning. Between the hum and the heart. By the time I reached the gate, the sun was already high, bleaching the desert into a white mirage. The guards looked at me strangely. One of them, a young corporal with sunburned cheeks, squinted and said, "Sir, are you all right? You're glowing." He laughed after saying it, but I could tell he wasn't joking. I caught my reflection in the glass of the guard booth, the same uniform, the same face, but my eyes looked different. They weren't shining, not literally, but something inside them refused to dim. "Report to command," he said, handing back my ID with a hand that trembled slightly. The base looked unchanged, metal, heat, regulation, but the air felt softer, as if the hum still hovered beneath the range of instruments. I could hear it in the soles of my boots, a pulse stitched into the rhythm of walking. In room C7, Hart was waiting. So was grey hair, and a third man I didn't know, the kind of presence that announces itself by how quiet everyone else becomes. No rank insignia. Civilian suit, eyes like flint. "Sergeant," Hart began, "we were concerned about your absence. You've been out of communication for 16 hours. "I went to the desert," I said simply. The man in the suit leaned forward. "And?" "There was light," I said, "and it wasn't coming from above." Hart slammed a file shut. "Enough riddles. We need data, frequencies, coordinates. You've been compromised by whatever this is, and until we know how, you're a liability." I met his anger without resistance. "You're not wrong. I am compromised, but not in the way you think." The room dimmed slightly. None of them seemed to notice, but I did. The lights above us pulsed once, soft, deliberate. The man in the suit frowned. "Do you realize your presence coincides with every anomalous power surge on this base?" "Yes," I said. "Then tell us what's causing it." I took a breath. "You are." Hart's fist hit the table. "Careful, Sergeant." But the suit raised a hand. "Let him speak." I stood, slowly. "You're all trying to locate the signal, as if it's out there on some satellite, some craft, some enemy. But it's not transmitting to us. It's resonating through us. Every living thing vibrates with it. Faith, sound, love, they're not metaphors, they're harmonics. And when we align, even for a moment, the universe listens back." No one moved. The hum was faint now, almost inaudible, but present, like a heartbeat behind the silence. Grey hair whispered, "You're saying this is biological?" "A field effect?" I smiled gently. "I'm saying it's everything." Hart looked like he wanted to shout, but something held him. His eyes darted toward the ceiling. "Do you hear that?" he muttered. The hum deepened. The fluorescent tubes glowed amber, not white, washing the walls in warm gold. Every instrument on the table flickered to life, uncommanded, screens filled with spirals, equations, symbols of impossible symmetry. The man in the suit stood abruptly. Cut the power. A technician ran to the panel, but when he threw the switch, nothing changed. The hum wasn't using their systems anymore. It was the system. And then it happened. The air grew luminous like dawn made liquid. The harsh lines of the room softened, and for a heartbeat, each person in that space looked weightless, their faces stripped of defense, eyes open like children seeing rain for the first time. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The light was doing the talking. "This is not conversion," the presence said inside the silence. "This is coherence, the moment when division forgets itself." Hart sank into his chair. Grey-hair's eyes glistened. The man in the suit stood frozen, his hand halfway to his earpiece. When the light dimmed, no one moved for a long time. Finally, Hart whispered, "What did it say?" I met his gaze. It didn't speak. It sang. He blinked, and something unguarded passed across his face, a tremor of belief, or maybe release. The man in the suit recovered first. "You realize this can never be reported." "I know," I said, "but you'll remember." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped, as though the words themselves had lost their meaning. That evening I sat outside the barracks, watching the desert swallow the sun. The base was quiet, too quiet for a military installation. No shouts, no engines, just stillness. One by one, the floodlights along the perimeter flickered on, and for a few seconds they glowed not white, but gold. I whispered to the night, "You're not done yet, are you?" The wind moved through the sagebrush, humming faintly. Never. The song only waits for more voices. I smiled, closed my eyes, and joined the hum. Softly at first, then with all of me. I started the recorder at 03:11 a.m., the quietest hour a base can manage. No briefing header, no case number. Just my name, the date, and a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. "This isn't a report," I said. "It's a witness." Outside, the desert held its black-blue silence. Inside, the little red light on the mic burned steady, a single star in a small universe. I spoke slowly, letting the words find their own weight. "If you're hearing this, you already know the official story failed. We kept looking for a transmitter, an origin, a threat vector. We missed the simplest fact. The message was never to us. It was through us. Holiness as coherence, prayer as alignment, love as resonance. The hum is not an invasion. It's the universe remembering its own name across living mouths. I paused, listening. The room's shadows shifted like breathing. I felt the presence, not above or outside, but braided into the ordinary. Dust, metal, sleep in my bones. I continued. The light isn't a miracle because it violates physics. It's a miracle because it reveals physics we were too narrow to notice. It doesn't demand belief. It invites participation. If you want it to speak, stop shouting. If you want it to stay, stop trying to own it. The recorder hummed faintly. Beneath that, deeper and older, the other hum threaded the air, soft, patient. A question rose in me, the one I'd tucked away even as I wore peace like a second skin. "Will it leave?" I asked, not into the mic, but into the room. "A candle does not leave a room," the presence answered, gentle. "Rooms learn how to hold it." I smiled despite myself. "Then this is how the room learns." I switched the recorder to continuous and set it on the windowsill. The glass held my reflection and, for a heartbeat, the suggestion of another. Light within light, a face made of intervals and care. I laced my boots, took my jacket, and stepped out into the pre-dawn cold. The base slept. No engines, no barked orders, only the soft electricity of a place that had stopped bracing against itself. I walked past the chapel. Someone had left a candle burning. Its flame was small, honest. I touched the door, whispered a thank you I didn't know how to aim, and kept going. Past the perimeter fence, the earth opened into the wide basin, the same one I'd stood in when the geometry first woke under my feet. The sky was a slate about to take chalk. I stood in the center and waited, breath ghosting in front of me. I didn't call, I didn't pray in words. I let the hum in my chest settle into the larger one that lives everywhere, in stone, in coyote ribs, in the idea of morning. It began softly, like a memory becoming audible. A pale glow bled up through the sand, not from a point, but from relation. Lines reappearing in frost script, spirals opening like careful hands. The air found pitch, frequencies stacked, overtone on overtone, until the basin was an instrument and I was a string tuned to it. I felt it in my teeth, in the old scar on my arm, in the place grief keeps its last chair. Nothing hurt. Everything included me. "Is this the end?" I asked, the child question I never quite outgrew. "It is the part where you stop needing an end," the presence said, warm as sunrise. A transmission is only last when the receiver learns to carry it forward. Light rose from the patterns, columns at first, then a single veil that lifted and thinned until it was everywhere, not erasing the world, but clarifying it. The mountains along the horizon weren't silhouettes anymore. They were names being spoken correctly for the first time. In the veil I saw faces, not alien or human, but attentive. Witness looking at witness, recognition meeting recognition. I understood then what I'd been walking toward, not departure, but belonging. The duet didn't need a soloist. It needed a willingness to hum the note that holds the others. My radio, long since powered off, clicked on in my pocket with a tiny electric sigh. Hart's voice arrived like a man waking up mid-sentence. "If you can hear this, I don't know what to tell them," he said unguarded, "but I remember, we all do." "Then that's enough," I said into the morning. Maybe he heard me. Maybe memory was the only channel that mattered now. The first edge of sun touched the ridge. Gold spilled down like certainty, unlearning its stiffness. The veil thinned to nothing and didn't go. It integrated. The hum settled into the ground the way rain settles into seeds. I took the recorder from my pocket, thumbed it on, and faced the new light. "Final note," I said. "If you're afraid, good. Fear is what happens when the door opens and you still remember the room. Step through anyway. Keep the candle. Learn the constellations. If you don't know what to pray, hum. If you don't know what to believe, be kind. Coherence will meet you where argument never could." A wind moved through the basin. I felt the presence smiling, not at me, through me, at whatever would come next. "I won't file this," I added softly, more to myself. "I'll live it." I set the recorder on a flat stone and walked toward the ridge as the sun cleared it. Behind me, the mic caught the sound the world makes when it remembers, a low, steady resonance braided with small human noises, boots in sand, a breath, a laugh that doesn't ask permission, then the wind, then the first birds, then the simple, faithful hush of everything agreeing to be here. The red light winked once, as if satisfied, and kept recording.